Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This show is brought to you by Auto Rescue Tools and Isaac Rodell. If you've been looking for a programming laptop, but you're not sure which one to buy or how to set it up, especially if you want to program multiple brands. You know, you've got some domestic vehicles, you've got European vehicles. Can the same software go on the same laptop? What size hard drive do I need? All those questions. Isaac's your guy. He can custom set up programming laptops that are ready to tackle any make or model. I got one of these laptops myself, and I can say that it is outstanding, and it really streamlines the process by having everything you need in one device. So if you're looking for something like that, I highly recommend checking out autorescuetools.com. You'll also find scan tools, diagnostic equipment, key cutting equipment, and much more. Check out the link in the show notes. I highly recommend it. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Just me on the show this week. I'm going to talk about wrong parts a little bit. I have mentioned this on the show before. There's previous episodes. Of course, it's an ongoing battle that we face in the automotive repair world. And if you're doing programming and keys, obviously it's going to affect you there too. But I'll give you some of my current thoughts on it, some recent things we've been battling with, and a couple case studies that I thought were pretty interesting that, who knows, maybe you'll run into something similar. But like I mentioned, I've talked about wrong parts before. And you know, it's one thing if you are in a repair shop and you are the one ordering the parts, you have a little bit more control over what you're getting in the vehicle. But even then, you may run into a situation where your supplier is still getting you the incorrect parts. Something was labeled incorrectly. Something was remanufactured incorrectly. Or it's just difficult to figure out what the correct component is, right? We face a lot of challenges. But with the mobile side of things, we often run into this because outside of keys and specific module situations, we're not really in control of what part the shop got for said vehicle. Now, we've somewhat trained some of our shops to at least check in with us to say, hey, is this part going to work in this application, specifically with a control module? And of course, that in itself is challenging because really the best thing that we can offer a lot of the time, especially when it's a used control module, right? They're replacing the PCM or body control module out of something, is we'll tell them, hey, you got to match the part number. And that's really the only way that we can guarantee that this is going to work, because there's not a database out there for a vehicle to say, this is the list of wrong part numbers that will work in this application, right? If you get something, the part number doesn't match on, let's just say, a body control module on something, it might work, right? I've programmed plenty of modules that had different part numbers than the original. And I'm not talking just, the last two letters are, a superseded number. This is like a different part number, but it's actually worked in the application. But that's a roll of the dice. We have no idea whether that's going to work or not. And again, there's not necessarily a database out there that's going to tell you what is going to work in the wrong application. So, and we tell shops in that situation too, like, hey, if you get the right part number and it's a quality module, we can make it work in X situation if we can do a used module in that situation. Of course, that's another layer of complexity, is even if you get the right one, can you make a used module work in that particular application or not? But if you get the wrong one, and that's the way you want to go, or maybe that's the only thing you can find, that's a possibility too. That's the closest one that you can get for this application. We'll try it, but you're going to be paying us either way, because we're not promising you that this is going to work. And we will do the best on our end to make sure that our part of it is done correctly, but there's limitations there, and we try to let the shops know that beforehand so they know what they're getting into, but we run into it all the time, right? And a lot of where this comes from is shops, buying parts from salvage yards, junkyards, eBay, other sources online, where there's some compatibility issues where they'll list, hey, this works for this application, but in some cases it's the same physical module, meaning it will plug in to said connectors on said car, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. It might be, but it might not be. And some of these databases or references that you can use online aren't terrible. I mean, you can definitely use something like car-parts.com. And that's actually a pretty helpful resource to help you figure out what module might belong in what application. Now, it's not 100%, right? There's still going to be a margin of error there, but you can use it and you can figure it out. But where we see a big issue is shops buying parts from local salvage yards, and they're just like, yep, this works in this application, when maybe it doesn't necessarily, or it's real close, but there's certain features that don't work in that body control module the way that they're supposed to, or it just won't complete programming because the Ford software doesn't like the part number, or the GM TLC doesn't like the part number of this radio. The hardware number is wrong, so it's just going to kick it back. And of course, okay, are there alternative methods to get some things to work? Yeah, but you're really getting into the weeds there. So we run up against this a lot in module programming. Now, you can also use things like RepairLink Shop, and that's one of our biggest resources when we are trying to determine, hey, what is the correct part number for this application? Because sometimes you're thrust into a situation, maybe a vehicle has come from another repair facility, maybe the customer did some work, maybe it came from the auction, and you don't have the original module, right? Of course, the easiest way is just compare the number on the module and get that same one. But if you don't have the original, it's already been replaced, and you're either confident the one that's in there is wrong, or you're wondering if the module or part that is installed is incorrect, you can use RepairLink Shop. And this is true for more than just control modules. You can use it for all kinds of different parts, and it's based off of the VIN, and it's pretty accurate as far as I found. Now, I was recently teaching a webinar for some folks in Australia, and unfortunately, if you're outside of the US, it sounds like you can't use RepairLinkShop.com, so I apologize if that's you. It is a nice resource to have if it's available, but anyways, what it does is it links dealerships basically to you, and you can look up parts based off of the VIN. You get that factory part number for not only control module, but you can even do it for keys as well, which I found very helpful to try to get the correct key, which we'll talk about a little bit more here. But when you have the current factory part number, that's real helpful, because then you can take that number, obviously compare it to what you have, but you can do some searching online with that. Now, a lot of times these numbers are the newest version. They've superseded others, and that's a common thing where you see a module. It's got an older part number, but it's still compatible with the one that you're working on. And sometimes we'll use other websites that sell factory parts, like there'll be like a GM online parts ordering. And if you look up the control module you're after, it'll have a list of superseded numbers that fall under this new number. And that might be a way to that, especially if you're doing a used control module, you could say, okay, well, at least this one's in the list of superseded parts. If you're working on Chrysler vehicles and you're doing control modules, especially this would apply to mainly engine control, transmission control, you can use their Fed World report that they update frequently. It's available free. If you just Google that, you'll find it. And that's been really helpful to determine whether the correct hardware application is in the vehicle we're working on, or if they're doing a used control module that's out of something else, is this hardware compatible with the vehicle that it's being installed in? Can I put the software that I need to into this module and have it work in this application, right? Because we run into that just a ton. It definitely seems to be one of the more common ones where there are so many different hardware options for a Chrysler ECM that physically will plug into the same car, right? If you think about the GPEC 2 controllers, the style of connector worked on a ton of different applications, but that doesn't mean that the hardware is the same across the board. There are definitely situations where that's not true. But that Fed World report will help you dial in. You can use some Control F action and figure out pretty quickly if what you're dealing with will work in your application. For GM control modules, if you look at the service number, because there's going to be a hardware part number, and then there's going to be a service number. That service number is the one that you want to match. And again, you can have the physical hardware that plugs into the same module, but you can have one out of a 4-cylinder, one out of a 6-cylinder, and there's missing drivers in that 4-cylinder module. Now the service number is different from what I've seen, but you can change the software, but it's not going to work in that application. You're not going to be firing those extra 2 coils or injectors because the drivers don't exist inside the PCM. And so these are all, battles that we face when we're doing the control module programming, especially doing used control module programming, which is a service that we offer. But there is some legwork behind it if you're going to try to find out, what is the correct number for this application. But like I said, repairlinkshop.com, big resource. You can use cardashparts.com. It's actually a pretty helpful free resource as well. Just be careful. I wouldn't say it's 100% across the board accurate, but it's pretty useful. But those are our most frequent go-tos when it comes to control modules. Now for keys are a whole nother animal. We struggle with this quite often. And this is one for us that we are directly the ones that are ordering the part. Now, figuring out what the correct key is for that car in order to order it becomes the challenge in a lot of cases. Not only that, but when you order aftermarket or refurb keys, sometimes the quality of said keys can be an issue as well. And we struggle with that, and we've changed vendors that we've used a couple times. We've been using Transponder Island as of late, and I gotta say, really impressed with the service, how quickly they can get keys to you at a reasonable cost, and they'll help you out if there's an issue. There's other key suppliers where that is definitely not the case. And even within that, we find some issues with the keys. Like we've been using Ilkos for a lot of our keys recently, and they're pretty good, but every once in a while you run into an issue with a key. Same thing with a refurb. Like if you get an OEM refurb, ideally that should be your best option. I mean, besides buying brand new from the dealer, I guess. But even then, we run into some issues here and there. But even if the quality of the key is okay, let's assume, okay, we got a good quality key, you could still get the wrong key, which is the point of this episode, is wrong parts. And man, this really does seem to be an ongoing issue when it comes to keys. So much so, I almost feel like the best way to do it is if there's 3 different options or 4 different options for said vehicle, just order all of those keys and hopefully one of them is going to work. Now, of course, if it's a blade style one, that gets tricky because like, which one do you cut first? But at least with a smart key style, you can attempt the key. I guess even then, in that case, there are keys that will lock once you attempt it. I had that on a GM Smart Key. There were 2 different FCC IDs. This was before I knew to check the tire pressure sensors for the frequency. And if I would have done that, I would have figured out that, okay, these are 2 different frequencies. This is the key that I need to use. But I tried the Smart Key that was the wrong one for the car first. The immobilizer portion of the Smart Key worked, but the RF portion didn't because it was the wrong frequency. Unfortunately, that locked that key to that car. Short of taking apart the board and trying to unlock it, I don't know if I could on that one. There's tools that will do that on some. That key's junk now. And, I wasted the cost of a key and that whole job probably isn't that profitable at that point, right? And especially that's why I've been hesitant to do in the past, because like you order 4 keys for a car and those 3 are oddball ones that you never see. I mean, do you go through the hassle of returning those? I'm sure the key supplier doesn't like that. Or do you just hang them on your wall at your shop and then never use them because it's for some European model that you're never going to see in the US? That's the challenge. So getting the right key ahead of time, we try our best. We really do. But there are so many things that can go wrong or you can get wrong. And again, so there's some vehicles where you have one option, right? This is the key for this application for this year. Maybe button configuration is the only thing that you have to pick from, but there's cars where there are several different options, especially when it comes to the FCC ID, right? This is something with Kias and Hyundais that we battle with quite often, where there'll be 2 or 3 different key options. And the physical key is the same. The buttons are the same. The frequency is the same, right? So 315 versus 433, but there are different FCC options. And I've talked about it on the show before. I wish there was a way that you could just check the FCC output of a key, but it's not really possible because the ID is not transferred in the data transmission of the key itself. It just operates differently. There'll be different amplitudes. And the way the message is transferred is going to be different based on the FCC ID that it has. Now, obviously, the car can recognize one versus the other, but there's no tool out there that has a database of all FCC IDs that will spit it out. If somebody eventually creates that, I will buy it tomorrow, but as far as I know, such a thing doesn't exist at the moment. So where I'm going with that is if you have a working key and it doesn't have that number stamped on it somewhere, and some do, right? So then, of course, you would just use that number when you're ordering, but not all of them do. So how do you know? Again, we can go to repairlinkshop.com. We can use that part number and we can order keys that way. I've had that be incorrect before. I've had that get me the wrong key when using that factory part number off RepairLink Shop. I don't know exact reasoning for that, but that's the way that's worked in some cases. Like I mentioned, button configuration is important too, but that's easy enough with like, hey, can you send me a picture of the key? And then we know, okay, this is the style and these are the buttons. Okay. And the other problem that we've run into, especially with smart keys, is like almost everything will work. And this is true of the aftermarket keys quite a bit. Again, when you're using the aftermarket keys, the quality's not going to be the same as if you're buying it from the dealer. And so we'll get stuff where like everything works but one button on the key, right? Like the trunk button doesn't work. Or back when we were using a different supplier, we would get these keys where the wrong button would do the wrong function, right? You would hit the unlock and the trunk would open or something ridiculous like that. But sometimes you get a key where almost everything works, right? You get the immobilizer portion. That's good. You get hey, have you ever been faced with the challenge of sourcing, installing, and programming a used control module in a vehicle? I know a lot of us have. It seems to be happening more and more often today with the volume of control modules on vehicles, the cost of some new ones, or even the availability of new control modules. In some cases, used may be the only option. So what do you do here? I strongly recommend checking out SJ Auto Solutions and Tommy Oliva. Tommy offers a cloning service for used control modules to make these things plug and play for the vehicle that you're working on. In a lot of cases, he is also able to source the control modules if you're unable to locate one for the vehicle that you're working on. But once you get connected with Tommy, he's going to offer fantastic support from start to finish to make sure that that control module is going to work in your application. He's also got tech support that he offers through his website, along with some free resources there as well on information about used control module programming. So make sure to check out SJ Auto Solutions. I can't recommend that enough. RF portion, right? You hit the lock or the unlock on the key. That's good, but then the smart key functions won't work. Or even this, one portion of the smart key functions don't work. I had a BMW, which when you get into the European world, this becomes, even more challenging. But everything worked on the key that I programmed to it, except when you would walk up to the door and use the proximity function where you press the button on the door handle. Or I don't even think that one had a button, but you touch the door handle, and if your key's in close proximity, it's going to unlock the doors. That portion didn't work for the new key I programmed in. It did for the original. That was just the one thing. Everything else worked. The prox function worked once you were in the car and you press the start button, but not for the door handle. So keys are a struggle in that way. And, we continue to try to grow and have methods to determine the correct key. And worst case scenario, we'll order a few so that we have all of the options if we're not sure. Now, sometimes it's easy to spot that you have the wrong module installed on a vehicle, sometimes not. And where we've run into this before is maybe we don't even know that something has been replaced on a vehicle. This has been the case when we see stuff come from the auction quite often. Also, again, a car can get worked on at another repair facility and then come to the repair facility that is our customer, and then we're involved and we don't know the history on the vehicle. We don't know what was changed. We don't even know if something was changed. We just know there is a problem. So I'll give you a couple examples of this and the methods used to, figure out that this is not the right module or component on this vehicle. So first one was a 2015 Nissan Altima. And a couple of us actually looked at this. Now, granted, we told the customer what to do correctly the first time, but they didn't do that, or they were not very accurate in their parts ordering, and so they created the same problem. After our first visit, we came back, we re-diagnosed it with the same answer. But anyways, this was a situation where the window on the passenger side would not operate, and they had already replaced the motor, and they had a couple switches for the passenger side that they were attempting to use. We came out, we diagnosed it, said, hey, this driver's side switch is incorrect for the application. Or I think actually what Steve said the first time, not that, hey, this is incorrect, but this switch is not functioning the way that it's supposed to. That was the information. So get a driver's side switch for this thing. It's not doing what it's supposed to. So he gets the switch, he puts it in, he calls us up. He's like, hey, it's doing the same thing. So I ended up going back out to this one, take a look at it, and I'm going through it. And what I ended up finding out is same thing that Steve did, but I looked into it a little bit further because I'm like, okay, well, how come, two switches are not working? Did you just get a bad one? Well, there's two different options on this Nissan Altima. You can have the auto function, or they call it the anti-pinch function for the windows, where it has the little A on the switch, right? So if you click the button and hold it, it'll bring the window all the way down or all the way up. And you can have that either just on the driver's side or on the driver and the passenger side. And that completely changes the configuration and the wiring for this vehicle, depending on which system that you have. Now, by looking at the wiring on the car and looking at the diagrams, and this is where I'm able to make that distinction, is number one, there's two different diagrams. If you go into the power windows, in the electrical diagram section of your service information, you can see, okay, there's two different diagrams. And you look at the wires going to the switches, you see, okay, the wiring is completely different. And in the situation where you have auto on both sides, you have a LIN bus that goes between the BCM and the two switches. And if you don't have that auto function on both sides, you just have it on the driver's side, there's no LIN bus. So the driver's side switch and the passenger side switch, but the driver's side switch communicates on a LIN bus in one application and does not in the other. Well, they had the wrong switch on there. They had the switch that only had auto for the driver's side, but they had auto on both sides of the vehicle, according to the wiring that was on the car. So I explained this to him. I'm like, hey, you need to get a switch. Well, I already got a switch. I'm like, well, you need to get the right switch. You need 2 A's on there. If it gets here and only has 1 A on the left, the driver's side switch, well, okay, that's the wrong switch. This is the wrong switch. Get the right switch. You got the right switch, and it worked correctly the way it was supposed to. So that's a real common example of things that we'll run into. But then when we're there, we have to be able to identify that, okay, there are different options for this vehicle. And I'm sure this is a pretty common one. If you work on Nissans, you're like, yeah, okay, that's just known. That's obvious. It wasn't for this shop, and I hadn't personally run into it before. But looking at the diagrams, it becomes pretty clear that, like, okay, I need to determine which application do I have, and then which switch is installed. Luckily, it was visual on this one. I didn't even check part numbers. I didn't need to in this case. It was just, hey, is there an A stamped on this switch or not? And, pretty easy to make that determination. The other one we dealt with recently was a bit more challenging. Now, this was a 2010 Toyota Prius, and this was a car that was from the auction, which wasn't disclosed to us at the beginning. Definitely would have been helpful to know. And the other part that was a little confusing about it was that the customer said that their customer said this thing was running and driving. They moved it around and then it stopped. And it would not go into park. And I think they actually were able to force it into park at one point or another, and then it wouldn't come out. But there is a park actuator motor or shift actuator motor on the front of this transmission in this Prius that's going to lock it into park or put it into gear. And it's a 3-phase motor, so it gets power in on one circuit, and then it's got 3 driver circuits and then a position sensor to let the transmission control module know what position it's in. Well, this thing wouldn't go, in or out of park, basically wouldn't activate this motor, and it was setting codes for, there was a C2300, and then there were 3 different codes, all for all 3 phases of that 3-phase motor. And again, these are just driven by the transmission control module, which is behind the glove box under the dash. And these are hard faults set every single time. And this one definitely beat us up a little bit, trying to figure out what was going on. Now, again, these are circuit codes, so we're looking at the circuit for the vehicle. And what we end up eventually finding is that there was no power going to this motor on the power feed, right? Again, there's one power feed, and then there's going to be 3 control circuits that the TCM activates ground on. But the TCM's looking at these circuits when the system is turned on to see that is there power there in the first place, because there should be if none of the drivers are active, right? It's kind of a logic check or a circuit check, and it didn't see that. And if we were to measure at the TCM on these control circuits, you would not see power there either. Well, again, what we ended up finding is that no power was being supplied to it. So where does the power come from? That's where it gets a little interesting. So it comes from the integration relay, which is in the junction block under the hood. Now, in order for this relay to send power there is another circuit that is labeled BMA out of the TCM that basically turns on a portion of this integration relay. Now, these are solid state drivers within this relay. It's actually, it's like a little control module. It has a processor on the board. But you could think of it as just, this is a control for a relay to turn on power to go down to the shift actuator. Now, the TCM was not supplying power on this BMA circuit like it was supposed to in order to activate this component. Now, we had jumped power to that feed that goes to the motor, and it didn't fix our problem. It actually set a shorted power code at that point, so it must have seen power there when it didn't want to see power, even though when we're trying to activate this thing normally, it doesn't turn on at all. So we're not exactly sure, and that kind of sent us for a loop for a while. The other thing that was confusing on this car, and that I don't have a for sure answer for because we never got to the bottom of this, we did fix it, but the keyless functions did not operate on this car the way that they were supposed to. So you could hit the lock and unlock button on the fob and nothing worked. The car didn't respond to that. You could put the key into the slot on the dash and you could power up. Now the vehicle wouldn't ready up, the ignition would turn on. But if you had the key out of the slot, you couldn't operate any of the keyless functions. And we did verify the keys, got a good battery in it and everything. And the key appears to be for the vehicle. If I have a smart key that I'm questioning, does this actually work for this vehicle? I'll pull the metal blade out. And if it turns in the door, it's not guaranteed, but it's a good sign that that key actually belongs to that vehicle. We didn't have any immobilizer codes. Interestingly enough, the security light was blinking on the dash, and I was curious about this, and we did chase the key thing for a while. I definitely went off on a rabbit hole I tried programming in the key, and it just kept failing, and it wasn't letting me do that. I spent a little bit of time on that, but I eventually went away from it because I had no codes. I had no security codes. There was a couple at one point because the battery was disconnected, but they were in history. But nothing was setting for anti-theft, because I'm thinking, like, why isn't this TCM providing power to activate this relay? And does it have something to do with the key in the ignition potentially? Well, I ended up going back to this. And at this point, I'm going to the integration relay that's under the hood, and I'm looking at circuits, from the TCM and to the shift actuator control. And I think what I was going to try to do was I was going to try to activate the relay myself. So this BMA circuit that I mentioned, it goes between the TCM and the integration relay. The integration relay then sends power out to the shift control motor on this 2010 Prius. Well, so I'm going to try to activate it. I'm going to be the BMA circuit. And sometimes I'll do that just to be like, okay, does this portion of it work? Like if I activate it because I tried sending power directly onto the power feed to the motor, that didn't work, but I want to try activating the relay and just see what happens. At this point, I'm trying stuff to see how the car reacts. Maybe it'll, show me something that gets me to where I need to be. In this case, it did help. When I sent power on this BMA circuit, which is what is supposed to be there to activate this relay, nothing happened. There's nothing going on. Now, again, it's a solid state relay, so it's not like you're going to hear a click, but I get no power out onto the circuit I'm supposed to get power onto. So then I'm wondering, okay, well, what else is connected to this relay that, would drive it? Now, I did have some trouble finding the pin out in the inner workings of this integration relay. At least in aftermarket service information, it was very difficult to determine what all was going on in here and where the ground side of the control of this relay was. And there's a ground going to this integration relay, and I think that's probably what it uses. But I couldn't find anything clear in the diagram, so I decided, okay, I'm just going to pull the cap off of this thing because it's a flat relay that's about the size of the palm of your hand, and it plugs in with 3 connectors. So I unplug it, I take it out, I pop this little cap off, and you can see the circuit board. Now, I know the pins, like I know the pin in on the BMA, I know the pin out that goes to the shift actuator. And so I'm just going to look at the board and see, okay, can I find where the ground side of this goes? To see if I can, figure out, just to make sure, like, do I have, ground control? Because as far as I know right now, this thing is not doing anything when I attempt to activate it. So I'm following circuits on the board. I'm using an ohm meter, go from the pin to here. And I find on the board, there's pads with solder on them on the board, but there's no driver there. There's a bunch of other drivers for other stuff, but it said FET 20. So it's a MOSFET that would supposed to be there or could potentially be there on this board, but it's not. There's nothing there. And I ohm it out, and I don't know that it was directly connected to the BMA circuit, but it was definitely connected to the output circuit to go to the shift actuator. And there's nothing there. So it doesn't matter even if the TCM was supplying power in that circuit, which it wasn't, and I guess I'll explain why I think that was. But even if there was power there, it's never going to send power to the shift actuator because there's no driver. It's like somebody pulled the relay out of the car, except for this, isn't necessarily a relay. It's just a transistor that's soldered onto a board, but it's gone. It's not there. And it's not like somebody took it off, right? That's not what this was. It just wasn't equipped with it. So this is where it gets a little confusing. Well, why would that be? Is this the wrong part for the car? So we get talking, and there had actually been some part swapping with another Prius that they had at this shop, which caused some issues of its own, but that's a different story. But this was the 2014 Prius, and we take a look at the part number that's in this one, and we take a look at the part number that's in the 2014, and they're actually the same. And that's why they were like, yeah, we had, swapped this integration relay, and it didn't make a difference depending on which one we put in there. And I agree, it wouldn't have changed anything. But the one that came in there, we had installed into this 2010 Prius, did not have the driver for the circuit that was setting the circuit codes. So we do a little bit of digging, and I was using ChatGPT for this, which actually was really helpful. And we find that there are different versions of this integration relay depending on the application that you have. And if you look at previous years and newer years than this 2010, so there's only like a year and a half that they did this, they put the relay, or you could say the relay, it's a driver circuit for this shift actuator circuit into the integration relay for this 2010 only. If you go older, there's a separate external relay. If you go newer, there's a separate external relay. Like the circuit is essentially the same, but it's got an external relay. So where I'm going with this is the part that we had that did actually come out of something like a 2014. I don't know when. The car came with it when it got to this shop, probably at the auction, getting swapped around. It came with an integration out of a newer vehicle that for the circuit that was setting circuit codes had an external relay. So they didn't have the driver on the board, so nothing was ever going to happen. And if you go older than a 2010, it's the same thing. Different part numbers, I think, but neither one of them would have worked in this application. In this application, I needed an integration relay for this year so that it had the correct driver on the board. So I told the shop, I was like, hey, here's the part number. I did use repairlink, shop.com, got the correct part number based off the VIN, which was different than the one that I had in there. And ChatGPT was actually really helpful to say like, yeah, that's not the right part for this. This is the right part. And it was correct. The part number that it gave me was matched what I found in repairlinkshop.com. So, if you're using, language models and stuff to help you on stuff like this, take it with a grain of salt, double check it. But in this case, it was very accurate. And it actually, I had mentioned the problems I was having, and it also mentioned that, like, yes, this is definitely something that happens if the wrong integration relay is put in there. So if you're a Toyota tech listening, you may have already known this and dealt with this 100 times, and it's really common. I've never seen it before. And maybe if that's you, you can help me explain the next part, because I told them, hey, this is for sure wrong. We have to for sure fix this, and it's probably going to take care of this park issue. I told them, I was like, I don't know about the key thing. That's weird, but it's very possible it has something to do because this integration relay runs a bunch of other different circuits. And again, finding the diagrams for it were difficult. So instead of doing it in that moment and just confirming like it's going to fix everything, I told them, put this in there, get the right one, and then see what happens. If there's more problems, call us, or we'll check in. We want to make sure it's fixed. And turns out that fixed everything. Everything worked once the correct integration relay was in. So what I'm thinking is there was another power supply circuit or some circuit that interacts with other modules on the vehicle that was not right when the wrong integration relay was installed. Whatever that was most likely preventing the TCM from even attempting to activate that circuit. Whatever that was preventing the keyless functions from working properly. And obviously the shift actuator circuits. And those are the codes that we have. So that was the thing that I chased, right? And quite often, I've said this before, when you have a vehicle that has multiple problems, Pick one that you know you can get to the solution of, follow that, ignore the rest, and a lot of the time you'll end up finding the source for all of the problems. Not always. Cars have multiple issues. That definitely happens. But I can't tell you how many times I've been in that situation. You're overwhelmed with like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And some things are just not as easy to follow. Some things don't have codes. Some things don't make sense. But if you got a hard code, you got a circuit code, follow that, keep going with that, see if you can figure out what's going on there. That's what I did here, and it got me to it just by, I was opening up the module, or the relay, not because I thought it was the wrong part. I had no idea which part number was which, and it plugged in and it looked like it fit. But going down that path is what allowed me to see that, like, oh, okay, I'm missing a driver here. This is not the right part for this car. So that fixed it, put the integration relay in there. So anyways, those are just my thoughts recently on wrong parts. I'm sure you guys deal with this too out there, doing what we do. So if you got a story about a wrong part, you want to share it, put it in the Facebook group or give me a shout. We'll have you on the podcast and talk about it. So these man-made issues, which wrong parts usually are, can be very interesting. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. With that out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.